Welcome to Solutions with Courtney Anderson. I am Courtney Anderson, and I will be hosting our show today. I always want to encourage you to come to CourtneyAnderson.com and let me know what's on your mind. Do you have any show ideas? Do you have any feedback? I want to do anything that I can to make this show the best it can be, and your participation and feedback is part of that process of continuous improvement. So here we are today with a show that is part of the Joyful Art of Business series. And our Joyful Art of Business is, one of the foundational principles of all of the programs and things that I provide in my services. The idea, of course, we're not looking only at one discrete aspect of our professional endeavors. We're not just looking at income or revenue or prestige or titles or any one element. What we're trying to do is get a snapshot, big picture, and ask ourselves, what's my return on investment in terms of the emotional, psychological, my well-being? And that's what we're talking about. The other part is that when we're focusing on our professional activities, which I call business, we want to remember it's ideally something where we express our individual creativity, the things that we uniquely perceive or feel or think, and that's why we call it an art. It is, if it's done, and I think the most effective way for us individually, which of course then ideally should be the most effective way collectively for your organization, for your society, for all of us. When we look in this area of our series, we try to look at different perspectives, lens, ideas to help us germinate and foster everything that we can do to create our individual paths to having this professional life that's individual, it's creative, it's satisfying, and where we also, in addition to whatever economic or goal tasks we may have, we also feel good, right? Again, we're trying to avoid that sort of nightmare scenario where someone, quote, has it all and they're miserable. And I have to say that almost daily when I'm sort of getting started for my day and even sometimes through the day when I'm reading different leading newspapers and I'm thinking, I'll read something that, again, drives home this idea to me that we've got to put our entire humanity into our work, and we also have to measure based on our entire humanity what the outcome is. And what I mean is I'll read some sort of headline of someone who is either very successful. Oftentimes, unfortunately, there'll be someone who was a successful business person, successful in a certain industry, successful, and something awful happened. They made choices for self-harm, to harm others through either, criminal acts or violence or all types of things. And so we have to remember that we don't have to follow the idea of the joyful art of business, but I strongly encourage that if we don't, it can sometimes a lack of attention to the emotional, psychological, to the feeling part of it, right? Do I like what I do? Am I quote, content or happy or joyful? If we just ignore it, then unfortunately, potentially there might be a higher probability of more negative outcomes. And I'd seen a documentary I've shared in other programs, and it was about someone who was an attorney and in the United States and very successful, had gone to the finest universities and had worked at some of the finest law firms and had gone out and started his own practice. And at some point he started to engage in criminal fraud, right, where he was basically falsifying documents and stealing money. And one of the pivotal parts in this documentary that just it was simultaneously so sad because it was so minor, and yet I do believe that it explained a lot of what the person did. So here you have somebody with the best schools, had this very fancy job as an attorney in New York City, which is sort of a pinnacle certainly of finance and global business, should have been, quote, right, should have been pleased. On paper had everything, right, and started their own firm. And in this documentary, the person with hindsight, of course, after getting caught and facing the punishment and for his crimes, he said something along the lines of he had gone to one of his vacation homes. So he had some vacation home outside New York City, and he was looking at his vacation home, and it was it was a nice vacation home, right? So he's got other homes he lives in, beautiful homes. In fact, they were in the documentary that he lived in the city, and then he had this other vacation home on the water outside New York City. And he was standing there, and he said something along the lines of, I had this vacation home, but there were so many other bigger vacation homes, and they were closer to the water, and they had more square footage, and they were just better. And he said something like, and I wanted that. I had to have it. I had to have that bigger home. And apparently, I don't know the veracity of it beyond what the documentary presented and some other materials I've read. That was sort of the trigger, right? Like I can't remember, but he was a millionaire in that area, but there were people who had more. There were people who had bigger vacation homes. There were people who had better view lots. And he just couldn't stand it. And he said that he had to have more. It wasn't enough. And so that was at least what he put forward, and started this cascade of criminal behavior, which culminated in his arrest and public humiliation and failure of his business, and people losing their jobs and people losing their investments. And my argument is that it comes back to this idea of not measuring your entire big picture humanity, because on paper it should have been enough. The best schools, your attorney in New York City, maybe you're not the richest person in New York at all, right? But you're, by any measure in the world, you were one of the most elite. And it was just this trigger. He said that he saw these other beach homes, and his beach home, his vacation home, just wasn't enough, and he just had to do whatever he had to do to get more. And then of course once you start that, we've talked about in so many programs, then you're on the path to really negative outcomes, because you never can win, right? Because even if you go get the biggest beach home in that area, I guarantee you there's somebody else somewhere that is either going to build a bigger home that you're going to have to see, or they're going to go in another part of the world and have a bigger home. And then you have to just keep, it's an arms race, right? And it's sad what people will do to destroy what should have been a really good life. And also in that documentary, he had one of his adult children, and that was willing to appear on camera, and it was just painful, right? Because now he's destroyed himself, he destroyed his company, because he had his own law firm, he destroyed the economic and careers of many people who worked for him and trusted him. He destroyed many of his clients in many ways, and then he destroyed his family. All because of this, where you don't stop to think, right? It's not enough to just look at one aspect. You have to take a step back and ask yourself, what will make me happy? Now, if what makes you happy is you want to be a criminal, well, that's a different. I would strongly argue that there might be some professional help or assistance to try to figure out why you think that's a good choice. But you got to get deeper to the root of these things. If you're insecure, that's okay. But if you don't address it, your insecurity sometimes, as this man I think was asserting, can lead you to very negative decisions. People will do awful, horrible, destructive things, because they're just trying to feel better. And if they feel like they're not good enough, or they don't have enough or whatever, they can, again, make very, very poor choices. So all of this, again, is expanding on the Joyful Art of Business, and it also relates to our specific show. And our specific show today, our topic is other people's craziness has not managed to make me crazy. Other people's craziness has not managed to make me crazy. And so this is a quote from an esteemed American poet, Lucille Clifton, and I've got some information in the show notes, and I've done some other shows and materials with some of her ideas and concepts before, so I certainly encourage you again, if you haven't looked at any of her work or don't know anything about her, look a little bit in the show notes and maybe some of the links, and then if you, more importantly than that, what she accomplished and sort of how the prestige that she was known for, go read some of her work. I strongly encourage you to do that. So here we are, and I just spent this sort of expanded introduction talking about giving an example of someone who should have been pleased with their lives, and yet they went and made all these horrible choices and destroyed their business and destroyed people's lives and destroyed their family. And that all tied in, right, as a sort of prologue example of what our topic is. And the person who I was referring to in the sort of example, the name of that person, if you want to go look it up and read a little bit more, his name was Mark Dreyer. So M-A-R-C, and then Dreyer, D-R-E-I-E-R. Again, fraud, Ponzi schemes. Apparently, allegedly, it was responsible for over $400 million. $400 million in investment fraud. So, my argument was that when we don't stop and examine our own lives and our own mental and emotional and feelings, the state that we're in, then we sometimes can potentially be more at risk for other poor choices. This topic is other people's craziness. It's not managed to make me crazy, which is really, really, I think, helpful. One, I just gave an example, right, of this American lawyer and business person, and then the at least from the criminal case, the $400 million in fraud and theft, and here's the thing. I get it. I understand at some point we all have those moments of looking around the world and thinking, wow, other people have this or someone else has that. I don't think it necessarily has to be something that leads us to a life of crime. The key is staying focused on and remaining vigilant about our own choices and about our own decision-making process. And so just because other lawyers in the United States or business people make these decisions, and I would argue, and of course, this isn't meant to be pejorative. I mean, this is the language from poets. So poets, of course, are artistic, and it's not meant in any way referring to people, who might have a mental health or a developmental challenge at all. It's just meant to, I'm interpreting, this is my interpretation of art. So for what that's worth, my interpretation is the term crazy or craziness is referring to someone who is making choices that have very poor outcomes, right? And projecting that out into the world through either their own behavior or things they say and do to me. And the argument is I'm not going to let other people's sort of dysfunction, maybe that's a better word, make me dysfunctional. Okay? And so just because other, again, business people or people in your part of the world, or for me, other American lawyers and business people engage in what I would call dysfunctional choices, that, crimes, that's not going to make me dysfunctional, engage in those types of things, because I'm going to continue to be vigilant and ask myself, is this part of my joyful art of business? How do I feel about my life? What am I getting out of this? And so when we just sort of look at that, this show topic, and it's part of a longer quote, you can see the power in this, right? A, it's you owning yourself and getting out of that whole sort of peer pressure, or I was, groupthink, or I couldn't make up my own decisions. I was just doing what everybody else did. And that old cliche, right, that you hear many parts of the world growing up, if everybody else was going to jump off a bridge, would you do that? When a young person will go to maybe an adult and say, well, all the other kids are, wearing this, or all the other kids are doing this, and maybe their caregivers or parents or guardians will say, well, no, I don't care what the other kids are doing. You're not doing that. And then the kid will be upset, and then the parent or caregiver will say, well, look, if they were going to jump off the cliff or the bridge, would you do it? Basically trying to teach young people, you got to think for yourself, right? And I think this is somewhat an idea that we can continue to work on the rest of our lives. It's not like we turn a certain age and all of a sudden we, never are susceptible to those ideas of other people's dysfunction. And of course, in the quote, the artist, the poet, was using the term crazy, again, not referring to any actual medical or condition or anything in a disparaging way, but we're just going to call it dysfunction, right? Poor choices. And the world is full of a lot of amazing, wonderful, inspirational, great things. And I enjoy, immersing myself in that as much as I can. I also am what I perceive to be, that's all that it is, my perception, somewhat of a pragmatist. So I also understand that the world is full of not awesome things, horrible things. Sometimes people who do not just, fraud and where they steal and hurt people financially and things of that nature. Some other people have other problems where they're, physically abusive or emotionally. I mean, there's so much that happens in the world. I've seen a lot of this, certainly when I have been a lawyer or a corporate consultant. I mean, there's a lot of things that happen that are not awesome. That's just part of one continuum. My choice is, what's my life like? Your choice is, what's your life like? Are you going to make your own decisions? Are you going to take the reins of your own life and steer, yourself where you want to go? Or you can just sit around and say, oh, other people have done this, other people said this, other people, and let that make you dysfunctional. And here's the reality. I don't accept, we talk about this concept that other people can make us do something, other people can make us angry, other people can make us hurt themselves or hurt ourselves, other people can push our buttons. I don't agree with that. And I put forward in a lot of programs why. I mean, if that's true, then nobody has any control, then we should have no penalty. If I'm just walking around like a mass of matter and whatever somebody else says or does, and they hurt my feelings, and oh my gosh, my feelings are hurt, so I'm going to go, break their car windows, and it's okay because I had no control because my feelings were hurt, then we're going to have a very different world. And I don't see enough evidence that that's accurate, that when someone else says or does something, it either diminishes or completely obliterates any of my ability to have any choices of what I do. So let's look at, there's a longer quote here, and I have a link to it in the show notes, and it's from an article from an Oregon, the Oregonian, which is a media outlet in the United States in the state of Oregon. And it's an article about this poet, right, Lucille Clifton, and it was in there we've got a longer version of the quote from our show title. So let's look at the long version of the show title. All right, so the longer version is, I do not feel inhibited or bound by what I am. That does not mean that I have never had bad scenes related to being black and or a woman. It means that other people's craziness has not managed to make me crazy. Now, even the first sentence of this longer quote, the first sentence is, I do not feel inhibited or bound by what I am. Now, that right there, to me, is maybe another show, because I find just that sentence to be very powerful, right? And I think it's something that I would argue is universal, that we should not feel inhibited or bound by what we are, by what I am, by what you are. Now, of course, I also argue that these things are all just perceptions. I mean, the author goes on in the next sentence to talk about, define what she's referring to potentially in this area. And she talks about gender, and she talks about color, which may also reference ethnicity. But the specific gender or the specific category she's referring to is irrelevant, right? And all these things, too, are somewhat constructs. I mean, I'm not going to, obviously we don't have the ability in this short show to delve into this, but there's, there's an argument that says that all of these ideas are just, especially things like color or race or all these types of things, they're just artificial, that they don't really mean anything. But they're ways that humans have just come up with defining or differentiating ourselves, and so people stick with them. I don't know. And when I say I don't know, what I mean is I don't have, quote, the answer to this. This is a very fraught area of, other people would argue that these are actually very important differences that actually define completely, everything from intellect to personality traits and things of that nature. So this is a very heated area, but it's something that we certainly want to acknowledge. My argument in many of the areas we talk about is that perception is just that. It's just perception. But I also argue perception is reality. So my point would be this. Whether or not race, or this author's argument of using black, she could have used white or any other label, whether or not it actually is something that means defined to her personality and her intellect and her skills, or it's just something that humans come up with, and that these terms change over time. It doesn't really matter. My point would be that her awareness that other people perceive her as this thing is helpful, right? So whether it doesn't, because if I say, you know what, I'm tall and I feel like I'm the tallest person in the world and I love my height and I'm so tall, that's great. Now, if the reality is that I am in a society where tall for people is defined as 6 foot tall, and I'm 5 feet tall, even though I feel tall, right? The perception in my society is I should understand that other people don't see me that way in most settings. And that's very important, because sometimes then we can help ourselves better understand how people relate to us and how to relate to the world if we just understand their other people's perceptions. I'm not saying we have to agree with them. I'm just saying that is helpful to understand what they think. All right, so this author says, I'm not inhibited or bound by what I am. Now, what I am is really up for discussion. Part of what I argue in our programs and resources is that what I am is totally defined by us, right? So if I think I'm a hard worker, then I'm a hard worker. If I think I'm smart, I'm smart. If I think I'm attractive, I'm attractive. On the other hand, if I think I'm unattractive, I'm unattractive. If I think I'm lazy, I'm lazy. If I think I'm, stupid, I'm stupid. So a lot of this is what we tell ourselves, and it's really important because it does shape how we treat ourselves, and whether or not we're kind to ourselves, whether or not we're at war with ourselves, and it also then relates to how we treat the rest of the world. All right, so part of it we define, but I also would argue no matter how you define yourself, whenever you interact with the rest of your society in whatever way that you do, they're also going to have their own perceptions that may agree with what you think. I mean, you may think that you're attractive, and everybody else may think that too. You may think you're unattractive, and everyone else may think that. I don't know. What I mean when I say I don't know, I mean it's specific to your experience. What I'm saying, though, is this is the core of so many things in life, right? Feeling that I have a sense of self-actualization, some would argue, Maslow would, or other people define me. So it's sort of big picture. Who am I? I don't know. Am I who I think I am? How do I even know what to think about myself? Which is a totally different issue. Or am I what other people tell me I am? And that's the core, is what this artist and poet, Lucille Clifton, who passed away in 2010, this is my interpretation again of her artwork, so take that for what it is. My interpretation is that she's saying, irrespective of how she came to her own definition, she does accept, at least during this time when she wrote this poem, that there was some perception of her gender as woman and as her, I don't know, color and or race and or ethnicity, totally debatable, as black. Okay, so leave it where it is. So if accepting that those things were what she perceived the world defined her as, right? Okay. Her argument is, I'm not inhibited or bound by either what she thinks she is or what other people think she is. And then she was, in my interpretation, referring to what she called bad scenes. She said she said that she potentially has had bad scenes. I think she means things that didn't go well, or literally what it sounds like, right? Scenes. Something happened, an event. Maybe she was at the store, maybe she was taking a walk, who knows? But something bad happened related to her perception of being identified as being black and or a woman. Okay. Well, what she said is, no matter what negative thing may have happened or what I perceive to have happened, I'm not arguing that, she's saying, I am not inhibited. I'm not restrained. I'm not limited. So that goes to that core of what I was saying, right? So if somebody either thinks I'm this thing, or even I think I'm this thing, right? Maybe I'm inhibited. Oh, look, I'm unattractive. I'm not smart. Okay. She's saying, I'm not going to be inhibited by that. And I'm not going to be bound. I'm not going to be tied to this. I'm not going to be restrained. I'm not going to be limited by either what she thinks she is or what she thinks other people think she is, or whatever. And she gave some two specific examples, right? Gender, and then in that instance, either color and or race and or ethnicity or whatever. The key isn't whether or not your gender is what her gender was, or what she identified as, or whether or not you're color or ethnicity. That's not the point. The point is, no matter what it is that you are, or you think you are, or you think the world thinks you are, it does not matter. It does not matter in terms of what you are capable of. You are not going to be inhibited or bound. So let's say you're a man and you're sensitive, and people said to you, men don't cry when you were growing up, and then you're an adult and people still, men don't cry. Who defines that? And even if they, whoever they are, have defined that, you're not going to be inhibited or bound. So what? You're going to cry. You feel like it, you need to get that out, it makes you feel better, or maybe it's tears of joy sometimes. Be emotional if that's what makes you feel comfortable. You're not going to be inhibited or bound by any of this stuff. The stuff is, what I am or what I think other people think I am. I don't care. And one of the things we talk about in a lot of our programs is, we're inside of ourselves, which is cool, and yet also it gives us a bit of a disadvantage because I see the world from inside. So I'm not walking around all the time seeing myself. Even the largest ego and the biggest narcissist isn't 100% of the time walking around looking in a mirror. I mean, that would also make it difficult to, drive or walk without tripping and things of this nature. We're walking around, I'm inside myself looking out through my own eyes, so I don't see myself all the time. Maybe I see myself when I'm in a mirror getting dressed or washing my hands in the restroom or whatever. But other than that, I'm inside of myself. Unless you have a very unique worldview, very few people walk around inside while they're walking around in life, getting something to eat, going to work, spending time with their friends. You're inside yourself, so you're looking outward. You're not seeing yourself. So again, I don't think most people would say, oh yeah, I walk around 24 hours a day, or the hours that I'm awake and conscious during 24 hours thinking I'm this gender, I'm this gender, I'm this gender, I'm this color, I'm this color, I'm this size, I'm this, who does this? Like, you're not even seeing yourself. You're in your own body. So you're looking inside out. You see other people, you see the rest of the world, but you shouldn't. I mean, I think things like I'm hungry or my feet hurt or, I'm excited about this or I'm nervous about that, but I'm not sitting around thinking all the time about the external stuff. I'm not even seeing that because I am me. I'm inside of me. And all this is to say that I continue to argue, and until I get more evidence and data that it's incorrect, and then I'll change my my assertions, because that's what you do. You try to get information, you try to see, is it somewhat credible or is it somewhat actionable, and you try to do as much data collection and research as you can, and then either things change, there's new data that comes up, and you realize, my goodness, now I need to make a new conclusion. But until that happens, I'm sticking with this idea that we should not let other people's actions or judgments define our actions or judgments. And I'm interpreting this show title and all of my examples from the criminal behavior from the United States attorney business person I referred to at the beginning all the way through now, that other people's dysfunction or other people's craziness, as the author used the term, has not managed to make me crazy. Why? Because I don't want to be crazy. I don't want to be dysfunctional. I don't want to be a white-collar criminal. I don't want to steal $400 million. I don't want to do all those things. So if I don't want to do them, I'm not going to do them. Now, someone could kidnap me, in theory, right, and put me under some sort of, medication where I'm unable to be conscious, and maybe, then they could take my unconscious body and take my finger and put it on the computer keyboard and use their hands to type my finger and make me click on things and steal money on the internet. This is a very elaborately constructed argument. That would be against my will and against my knowledge. Absent that, though, if I have the ability to control my actions and my words, then I'm going to try to think things through and ask myself, is this choice going to help me achieve and surpass my goals? And what's the return on the investment? Maybe I'll surpass my goals in terms of having a bigger beach house, but it is also, since I've stolen the money and committed fraud, I will get caught eventually. I'm either going to get caught and have to go to jail and be embarrassed and publicly shamed, or I'll get caught and I'll just harm myself so that I don't have to go to jail. But no matter what, I will get caught eventually. And even if before I get caught, I have this ongoing stress, and you hear this from especially white-collar criminals. They express it very articulately, that while so you started doing the criminal bad thing, and then you know that you're doing the bad thing because you weren't drugged and kidnapped and had someone, move your fingers while you were unconscious on the internet to steal money. You did it yourself. You were conscious and you were awake and you remember it. So you're waiting to get caught, and you have all this anxiety. And people go through elaborate schemes in most of this white-collar fraud where they think, oh, okay, I'll go out and I'll steal more money, and then I'll pay back the first money I stole, and then eventually everything will, my real businesses that are legitimate will take off, and then I'll be a big success. I'll pay back all of the crimes, and nobody will ever even know what I did. How often does that happen? Almost never, because you'd have to. If your legitimate business and non-criminal activity would have done that, then you never would have been in a situation to steal to begin with. The argument people have is, I don't have the ability with my legitimate business, so that's why I'm going to go make up these fraudulent criminal activities. If it was going to work, it would have been working. So it's up to you. It's up to me. We decide. We don't just. Again, we have many other shows where we get into all the details, and we don't get all, but we try to continue to explore these ideas about free will, and try to delve into these. But within whatever parameters may exist or may be perceived to exist, other people's dysfunction or other people's craziness does not mean that it has to create dysfunction for us. And I love this idea, again, of not being inhibited or bound. Other people may think things about us. And here's the thing. Even people who live in really isolated parts of the world, somebody thinks something about you, right? Does that define you? Does that limit your choices? That's your question. That's your issue. And I tried to give sort of a more business examples outside of the show that you can get into very negative spirals of poor choices and more poor choices, and a quest to try to think about other people's dysfunction and worrying about trying to meet what you imagine to be whatever the pinnacle of perceived success is. So, again, I encourage you to continue to explore these issues for yourself. I do not, at this time, accept the premise that we have zero ability to do anything other than just let other people dictate what our behavior will be. So if you feel that you're dysfunctional, I wouldn't agree with any conclusion that you would draw that it's because other people were dysfunctional, that's why you're this way. Well, no, that's your part of that. I'm arguing is your own response and your own decision-making process. So I really hope that you take this opportunity to create your own space where you are going to make your own choices about your own dysfunction, and then you're going to accept that other people make their choices. That's okay. I'm not caught up in that. And they're going to create their lives, their choices, and their outcomes, and you're going to create yours. Again, thank you so much for joining me. You can always come to CourtneyAnderson.com and have a wonderful rest of your experience today.